إني أمد يدي إلى جميع القيادات. فكما يرفض تيار المستقبل أن يكون على صورة حزب الله.
Good afternoon on this Monday, February 17th. I'm Yumna Naufal and these are today's headlines. Tamam Salam begins his first day of work as Lebanon's new prime minister after forming a 24-member government. Hezbollah chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah says his party will fight on in Syria despite the wave of car bombings targeting Shia areas in the country. And U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry slams Russia for enabling Syria's President Assad to stay in power. Tamam Salam is welcomed by staff members after he arrived at the Grand Sarai to begin his work as Lebanon's new prime minister. Salam, who formed his 24-member all-embracing government after a 10-month deadlock, was accompanied by Environment Minister Mohammed Mashnou. He was welcomed by Cabinet Secretary General Sahil Bougie and senior government staff. The first challenge for Salam's government is to agree on a policy statement which in the past has faced controversies in national unity cabinets. The cabinet will hold its first session at Babda Palace on Tuesday to form the committee that will draft that statement. Hezbollah chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah says his party will keep on fighting in Syria despite the wave of car bombings targeting predominantly Shia areas in the country. Nasrallah warned that Takfiri forces, as he called them, pose a threat to the entire region and that they would have come regardless of his party's involvement in Syria. He also accuses Israel and the United States of benefiting from Takfiri's plots in the region. He argued that the military intervention in Syria was designed to protect Lebanon from the threat of al-Qaeda-linked groups blamed for a string of attacks in areas where Hezbollah enjoys wide support. He also vowed that his group will win the battle against these groups and that it is just a matter of time. His comments come a week after the arrest of Naim Abbas, a Palestinian and a leading figure in the al-Qaeda-linked Abdullah Azam brigades, which has claimed responsibility for several bombings in the country. Parliamentary Speaker Nabih Berri says bolstering the Lebanese army should be the country's top priority in the wake of recent deadly bomb attacks across Lebanon. Speaking from Kuwait, he also expressed hope that the new government will increase the number of military personnel as Lebanon is about to turn into a front line in Syria's war, spilling into Tripoli, Hermel and Akkad as well. He adds that not only political figures are targets, but Lebanon as a whole, including its army, resistance, regions, capital and suburbs. Lebanon continues to feel the repercussions of the conflict in Syria, with clashes in the northern city of Tripoli between supporters and opponents of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Berri assured the Lebanese living in Kuwait that Lebanon will not fall despite the threat of terrorism. A woman in a wheelchair who was prevented from boarding a plane over the weekend by an employee of Lebanon's Middle East Airlines plans to sue the company. Journalist Rola El-Helo says that a Middle East Airlines employee told her she could not board her flight to Cairo because she was alone and taunted her by challenging her to get up and walk to prove she was able-bodied. The story sparked outrage after it aired on several local television stations. Video footage shows Helu crying bitterly as she explains how hurt she has been by the incident, adding that she often travels by herself. She's reportedly planning to go through with a discrimination lawsuit despite an apology issued by Middle East Airlines. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is accusing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad of stonewalling in peace talks between the Syrian government and oppositions. Kerry made his comments during a news conference held alongside Indonesia's Foreign Minister Marty Natalegawa in the Indonesian capital of Jakarta. Kerry said Assad's team refused to open up one moment of discussion during meetings last week in Geneva, which ended with no progress toward breaking the impasse in the nearly three-year-old conflict in Syria.
Assad, who says he wants to talk about terrorism, Assad himself is a magnet for terrorists. He's the principal magnet of the region for attracting foreign fighters to Syria. Moreover, Assad himself is engaging in state-sanctioned terror against his own people. We still believe there is no military solution for respect to Syria. There has to be a political resolution. But right now, Bashar al-Assad has not engaged in the discussions along the promised and required standard that both Russia spoke up for and the regime spoke up for, that they would come to Geneva and accept the Geneva I communique as the basis of negotiations. They have refused to open up one moment of discussion legitimately about a transition government.
The rebel Free Syrian Army has fired Salim Idris as its military chief, calling him ineffective and lacking in experience to lead military operations on the ground. In a video broadcast on the internet on Sunday, the rebel coalition said its military council had decided to replace Idris with Brigadier General Abdullah al-Bashir. Colonel Qasim Saaduddin said the decision was taken due to paralysis within the military command these past few months. This restructuring is intended to raise morale amongst the FSA, once the country's strongest armed opposition force, but now increasingly becoming marginalized by rival groups. It has been weakened by internal rifts and by competition from other rebel coalitions, such as the Islamic Front, which is the powerful alliance formed last year that is now the largest rebel force with tens of thousands of fighters. Coming up, 12 Years a Slave takes home Best Picture at the British Academy Film Awards. Stay tuned for more after the break. Welcome back. Israeli President Shimon Peres hails remarks by Mahmoud Abbas on the Palestinian refugee issue, which he says shows the Palestinian president's seriousness about reaching peace. Peres' office quoted him as saying he was happy to hear him before going into a meeting with Peruvian President Ollanta Humala. At a meeting with 250 Israeli students, Abbas says he did not intend to flood Israel with returning Palestinian refugees. He also states there is no need to redivide Jerusalem in order to have a Palestinian capital in the Arab Eastern sector. The question of the right of return for Palestinian families who fled during the war which accompanied Israel's independence in 1948, is one of the most disputed issues in the conflict. According to Peres' office, the Israeli and Peruvian presidents discussed the peace process and increased economic, scientific, and agricultural cooperation. And negotiations over Iran's nuclear program will resume this week against a backdrop of tough talk from leaders in Tehran and Washington, which has complicated the already difficult task of resolving a decade-old row over uranium enrichment. Negotiators are expected to meet in Vienna on Tuesday, February 18th, 4 weeks after Iran began suspending high-level uranium enrichment in exchange for temporary sanctions relief, the result of a landmark interim deal struck at the end of November. During that time, domestic tensions have risen in Iran and the United States. Hardliners in each country have criticized their leaders for weaknesses by making too many concessions while hammering out deals with a long-standing enemy. U.S. President Barack Obama has been attacked for appeasing Iran, leaving a key U.S. ally, Israel, exposed, and for nudging Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries towards countering a potential Iranian threat by hatching their own nuclear plans. A co-pilot on an Ethiopian Airlines flight hijacked the aircraft and flew it to Switzerland looking for asylum. The flight had taken off from the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa and was headed to Rome when the hijacker steered the plane toward Geneva. Police say the Ethiopian man in his early 30s was arrested when the plane landed at Geneva International Airport. Reports say the co-pilot took control of the plane when the pilot went to the restroom. The 202 passengers and crew aboard the craft were not harmed. This was welcomed as an outcome from the last time an Ethiopian Airlines was hijacked. Back in 1996, 125 people died after a hijacked Ethiopian Airlines